The unexpected will. The solicitor's office was a sanctuary of hushed expectations and the musty ghost of aged documents. Sunlight, fractured by leaded glass, painted shifting patterns on the walls, each mote of dust a tiny dancer in the stillness. Edward fidgeted against the rigid back of the leather chair, the polished mahogany table reflecting a portrait of youthful impatience. An expensively dressed man, a premature furrow creasing his brow. Freedom was the prize, a life reclaimed. Across from him, Alastair Finch, the family's legal gatekeeper, broke the silence with a deliberate clearing of his throat. Finch, a figure hewn from stone and steeped in tradition, presented an unyielding front in his bespoke suit and meticulously groomed silver hair. He held the weighty testament to Victor Hastings' final desires. "Very well, Mr. Edward," Finch intoned, his voice as dry as old vellum. He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze descending upon the will. "Let us proceed. I trust you are prepared for the unfolding." Edward scoffed softly. Prepared? He'd spent the past 3 weeks mired in a swamp of platitudes and bureaucratic entanglements since his father's demise. He doubted anything held the power to truly shock him. "As ready as I'll ever be, Finch. Get on with it." A faint tightening around Finch's mouth betrayed a hint of disapproval. Ignoring Edward's curtness, he began to read in a monotonous cadence, the arcane language of the law swirling around Edward like a sluggish current. Gifts to charities, provisions for distant kin, a predictable dispersal of assets. Tuning out the drone, Edward's thoughts wandered to the looming board meeting and the grim forecast of the quarterly figures. Then, Finch's timbre shifted, a subtle alteration that caught Edward's ear. "And to my son, Edward Victor Hastings, I entrust the Hastings Group in its entirety, along with all affiliated properties and holdings, contingent upon the following." Edward tensed, a shiver tracing its way down his spine. Contingencies? His father had been a master of control, yet nothing suggested such a condition. Finch pressed on, his delivery devoid of emotion. "That within 6 months of this reading, my son, Edward Victor Hastings, shall enter into matrimony with Milana, he faltered, adjusting his glasses once more, as if struggling to decipher the very words before him. "Milana, daughter of the late Mr. Darius Volkov." Silence crashed down, more oppressive than the preceding quiet. Edward fixated on Finch, his thoughts struggling to assemble themselves. Marriage? To whom? The name Milana Volkov was foreign to him. This had to be some error. What? The query escaped him, a strangled sound. "What did you just utter?" Finch raised his head, his face an unreadable mask. "The instrument stipulates that you must wed a Milana Volkov within 6 months to secure your inheritance of the Hastings Group, Mr. Edward." "That's preposterous." Edward surged to his feet, the heavy chair screeching a protest against the polished floor. "My father can't simply orchestrate my nuptials. This is the 21st century, Finch, not some feudal domain." Finch remained a picture of composure, an island of calm in Edward's rising storm. "Your father held tradition in high regard, Mr. Edward, and he was a man who meticulously planned ahead." "Tradition? This is absurd. I don't even recognize this woman's name. Who is she? Where does she reside? What motivated my father to do such a thing?" Edward paced the confines of the room, each stride amplifying his agitation. He raked a hand through his flawlessly arranged hair, disturbing its meticulous order. "I appreciate this is unexpected," Finch offered, his tone carefully measured. "Nonetheless, the will is unambiguous. Should you fail to satisfy this condition, the Hastings Group, along with all related assets, shall be relinquished to the Hastings Foundation under the stewardship of a board of trustees." Edward ceased his pacing, a chill seeping into his bones. The Hastings Foundation? His father's cherished cause. A philanthropic gesture, yes, but also a bureaucratic labyrinth. He couldn't allow it. All he had strived for, all that was rightfully his, would vanish. There must be an alternative, he asserted, his voice strained. A loophole, a technicality, something to circumvent this. Finch shook his head slowly, a gesture of finality. I'm afraid not, Mr. Edward. Your father was a man of exacting detail. He foresaw every potential challenge. The clause is impenetrable. Edward collapsed back into the chair, the fight ebbing away. He felt as though he'd absorbed a physical blow. An arranged marriage. It was ridiculous, antiquated, a throwback to a bygone era. Yet, here he stood, facing the tangible threat of losing everything should he defy it. Tell me about this Milana Volkov, he requested finally, his voice subdued. What is her story? Finch consulted a file resting on his desk. The Volkovs are a family of considerable standing in Eastern Europe. Your father maintained commercial ties with Mr. Darius Volkov for many years. Miss Milana is his sole surviving offspring. And why have I never become aware of her? Edward inquired, suspicion coloring his words. Why was this kept discreet? Finch paused, his eyes momentarily averted. Your father valued his privacy, Mr. Edward. He preferred to compartmentalize his private life from business affairs. As to why you remained uninformed, one can only surmise he deemed the timing inappropriate. Edward remained unconvinced. Finch was holding back, deliberately omitting information. But he wouldn't press the issue. Not now. He needed facts, not conjecture. What further details can you provide? He asked. What does she occupy herself with? What is her disposition? Finch cleared his throat once more. I'm afraid my knowledge is limited. She is reputed to be intensely private. She has avoided public appearances for several years. Avoided public appearances? Edward's brow furrowed. What does that signify? Finch shuffled the papers before him, his gaze avoiding Edward's. There are certain circumstances surrounding Miss Volkov that render her unique. Unique in what regard? Edward persisted, his curiosity piqued. Finch hesitated again, then sighed resignedly. Miss Volkov observes a veil. She has done so since her youth. It is ingrained in her family tradition. A veil? Edward stared at Finch, incredulous. A woman cloaked in a veil? The situation grew more bizarre by the moment. He envisioned a shrouded figure, a recluse hidden away in some distant castle. She hardly seemed the candidate for his wife, the impending figurehead of the Hastings lineage. So, allow me to summarize, he stated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I am compelled to marry a stranger residing in Eastern Europe, who conceals herself behind a veil. If I fail, I forfeit everything. Is that an accurate assessment? Finch nodded slowly, a glimmer of something resembling relief illuminating his eyes. Regrettably, yes, Mr. Edward. That encapsulates the situation. Edward sank deeper into the chair, his head reeling. He felt ensnared, manipulated, his future dictated by a deceased man and a woman unknown to him. He faced two unpalatable options: embrace his father's bizarre condition and wed the enigmatic Milana Volkov, or relinquish all he held dear. Neither held any appeal. He turned his attention to Finch, his expression hardening. Very well, Finch, he declared, his voice cuttingly resolute. Let us locate this Milana Volkov. I require to know everything about her. Every single detail. Finch nodded, a flicker of something similar to relief in his expression. Certainly, Mr. Edward. I will execute the necessary arrangements immediately. As Finch began assembling his documents, Edward stared out the window, his mind ablaze with possibilities. He remained uncertain of what awaited him, but he knew one thing with conviction. He would not allow his father's will to steer his life. He would find a means to navigate this labyrinth, to seize control of his destiny, even if it required marrying a veiled woman he'd never met. A veiled bride. The lead-up to the wedding had been a whirlwind of bespoke tailoring, gourmet food samplings, and relentless consultations with the Hastings Group's lawyers. Edward navigated it all with the detachment of a specter, his thoughts a battleground. Contempt wrestled with reluctant acquiescence. His father's phantom victory loomed large. Even from beyond the grave, Victor Hastings dictated his son's existence. He'd often find himself gazing down from his penthouse, the urban sprawl a shimmering nebula far below. Was he truly doing this? Surrendering his liberty, his very essence, for a corporate behemoth, an inheritance he questioned even desiring? Sarah, the ambitious architect he'd been dating, sprang to mind. Her incisive intellect, her daring designs. Not love, perhaps, but a vibrant reciprocity, a kindred spirit understanding the city's heartbeat. Now extinguished, a casualty on the altar of Hastings' group shares. He attempted to conjure Milana's image. The veiled figure from the photographs. A riddle swathed in silk. Was she, too, a mere player in his father's manipulative scheme? Or did she harbor hidden intentions, her own justifications for accepting this ludicrous arrangement? Wedding day dawned, leaving Edward strangely devoid of feeling. He passively endured the ministrations of stylists, the vapid congratulations of the groomsmen. He felt divorced from reality, like an audience member observing a drama where he'd been unwillingly thrust into the starring role. The Hastings Chapel, a testament to the family's alleged piety, more truthfully, their pretense of it, overflowed with attendees. The atmosphere hummed with hushed conversations and the heavy perfume of lilies. At the altar, Edward stood isolated, a lone figure amidst expectant faces. He noticed Eleanor in the front pew, her expression a carefully constructed facade of sympathy, tinged with something else indefinable. Was it genuine pity? Or something colder, more calculating? The music swelled, the organ's booming resonance vibrating through the floor. He drew himself upright, forcing concentration. The chapel doors swung open, silencing the room. Milana. She moved with understated elegance, her ivory gown cascading around her like liquid moonlight. He couldn't discern her face, of course. The veil, an intricate tapestry of embroidered lace, utterly concealed her features. A pointed reminder of the ludicrousness of the situation, the performance about to unfold. He watched her glide forward, each step precise and measured. There was something in her bearing, the set of her shoulders, that suggested inner fortitude, a resilience that contradicted her masked anonymity. As she reached the altar, he caught a glimpse of her hands, small and refined, graced with a simple golden circlet. They trembled almost imperceptibly. He wondered at her thoughts, her emotions. Was she as petrified as he felt? The ceremony was a disorienting sequence of vows and pronouncements, the words echoing in the cathedral-like space. Edward recited his lines mechanically, his voice a monotone devoid of feeling. He was a marionette, dancing to the tune of his deceased father. During the exchange of rings, he almost dropped the platinum band, his fingers clumsy and uncoordinated. He slid it onto Milana's finger, the metal shocking against her skin. A momentary connection sparked, a sense of shared destiny. Then, the moment he'd been dreading arrived. The priest's pronouncement hung in the air. "You may now kiss the bride." Edward paused. He gazed at Milana, at the veiled visage that hid her true self. This was it. No turning back now. He inhaled deeply and reached out, delicately lifting the edge of the veil. The chapel held its breath, the only sound the faint whisper of silk. He raised the veil just enough to expose her mouth, full, softly sculpted. A pale rose against the ivory fabric. He leaned in, his heart hammering in his chest. The kiss was feather-light, almost saintly, a mere graze of lips. Yet in that fleeting contact, something awakened within him. A nascent curiosity, a trace of something more. He lowered the veil, concealing her face once more. The world seemed to sigh in relief. The ceremony concluded, and they turned to face the assembled guests. Edward caught Eleanor's gaze, her smile taut and brittle. Her eyes flicked between Edward and Milana, a flicker of something enigmatic playing across her features. Was it malicious joy? Deep disappointment? He couldn't decipher it. As they proceeded back down the aisle, hand clasped in hand, Edward glanced at Milana. She remained silent, her gaze fixed straight ahead. What lay hidden behind the veil? What secrets were contained within? Would he ever truly know her? The reception proved a lavish spectacle. a symbol of the Hastings family's considerable affluence and authority. Edward moved through the throng, shaking hands, acknowledging congratulations, feeling like an interloper in his own narrative. He retreated to the balcony, seeking solitude and a respite from the stifling indoor atmosphere. The air felt bracing, a welcome contrast. Footsteps sounded behind him, and he turned to see Milana approaching. She paused beside him, her veiled face tilted towards the twinkling cityscape. "It's breathtaking, don't you think?" she murmured, her voice surprisingly gentle and resonant. Edward was taken aback. He was hearing her speak for the first time. "Yes," he replied, "it is." A silence lingered between them, the city unfolding before them like a glittering panorama. Then Milana pivoted towards him, her veiled gaze meeting his. "This isn't what you envisioned, is it?" she voiced softly, almost a whisper. Edward hesitated, unsure how to respond, unsure what she sought to hear. "No," he confessed finally, "it isn't." Milana nodded, her veil shifting slightly. "Nor mine," she admitted. And in that instant, Edward felt a curious kinship with this veiled woman, this stranger he had just vowed to spend his life with. A flicker of possibility ignited in the darkness. Perhaps, against all odds, this marriage wasn't the terminal point of his life. Maybe it signaled the dawn of something uncharted, something unforeseen, something genuine. He studied her, the veiled face concealing her persona. He understood the long road ahead, the secrets yet to be unveiled. But for the first time since his father's passing, he experienced a nascent intrigue, a yearning to understand the woman obscured behind the veil, a desire to unravel the enigma that was Milana Volkov. Whispers of society. The silence in the bridal suite was a suffocating blanket, heavier than the brocade adorning the walls. Edward's throat cleared with a sharp crack, the sound strangely amplified in the room's gilded cage. Milana remained a still life on the edge of the chaise, her veiled countenance an unreadable enigma. The phantom touch of that stolen kiss lingered, a discordant melody against the present arrangement. "So," he began, his voice betraying his unease, "are you comfortable in here?" A barely perceptible dip of her head was the only reply. He put back a sigh. Engaging her felt like attempting conversation with a marble statue cloaked in shimmering fabric. Turning to the window, he found little solace in the distant city's glow. Instead, a knot tightened in his stomach. "Look," he said, pivoting back, "this is strained. For both of us, I imagine. We need to find some footing, some way to navigate this situation." "Navigation," she echoed, her voice barely audible. "A commendable goal. Is that your aspiration, Mr. Hastings?" The formality pricked. He hadn't considered her potential discomfort. Running a hand through his hair, he corrected, "Edward. And yes, amicable navigation seems preferable to perpetual discord." Silence stretched, thick and palpable. He felt, more than saw, her scrutiny. "Very well, Edward," she finally conceded. "Amicable navigation it is. Perhaps we should delineate some parameters for our shared existence." He arched a brow. "Parameters?" "Precisely. I possess certain stipulations regarding our arrangement." Before he could inquire further, a delicate rap sounded at the door. Mrs. Gable, his father's former secretary, stood with worry etched on her face. "Mr. Hastings, you're needed downstairs. The reception is well underway, and your absence is attracting attention." Relief washed over him. "Of course. I'll be right there." He faced Milana. "We can discuss these stipulations later." With a shallow bow, he left the suite, the air heavy with lilies and unspoken words. Downstairs, the ballroom throbbed with life. The Hastings had left no indulgence unaddressed. Lights splintered off crystal chandeliers, champagne cascaded in fountains, and a waltz filled the air. Edward plastered on a congenial smile, wading through the tide of well-wishers and their veiled inquiries. He saw Serafina Dubois holding court by the champagne, her scarlet gown a visual shout amidst the pastel sea. Serafina, the notorious gossip columnist, wielded a pen capable of societal demolition. Avoidance was futile. Drawing closer, he caught snippets of her commentary. Positively bizarre, darling. Veil from crown to toe. Utterly archaic. Her gaze snagged on him, and her eyes gleamed with anticipation. Edward, darling. At last. We were just dissecting your singular bride. He forced a smile. Serafina. As always, a pleasure. Singular is an understatement, interjected Beatrice van der Linde, her visage pulled taut. Rumor has it she refuses to unveil, even for you, Edward. Serafina edged closer, her tone dripping with saccharine concern. Is all well, dear? Is she indisposed? Edward's jaw tightened. My wife is perfectly healthy. The veil is a personal preference. A perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched skyward. A personal preference? Intriguing. One wonders what she conceals. She sipped champagne, her gaze unwavering. Perhaps a blemish? Or something darker, a clandestine past. Fury simmered, but he kept his tone level. My wife's history is her own. I suggest you abstain from conjecture. He excused himself, the whispers swarming around him like angry bees. Air. He needed air. Seeking refuge on the terrace, the cool night offered a balm to his flushed skin. Leaning against the stone balustrade, he watched the city lights flicker below. The rumors gnawed. He knew next to nothing about Milana, beyond what the prenup detailed. Was she concealing something? Was there a motive behind the veil beyond a simple, personal preference? Lost in thought, he overheard a muted exchange from behind a potted palm. Reliable source says her family is teetering on ruin. The Urkaleves are desperate, and this union was their only lifeline. Ruin? So, Hastings agreed to this for business? Precisely. And a veil? Likely to obscure the fact she's older than she claims. Or less than prepossessing. A chill snaked down Edward's spine. Emerging from behind the palm, his expression betrayed a storm of suppressed fury. Mrs. Abernathy and Mrs. Featherstone gasped and stammered apologies, but the seed of doubt had taken root. He retreated, the whispers echoing in his mind. A business transaction, a family in extremis, a hidden imperfection. Was that all he represented to her? Was she as trapped as he was in this facade? Back in the bridal suite, the silence pressed down with renewed force. He poured a measure of scotch, the amber liquid offering scant solace. He stared at the closed door leading to her bedroom, the veil a constant, mute divide. He needed answers. He had to decipher who this woman was, the woman to whom he was now inextricably bound. Inhaling deeply, he approached the door, his hand hovering over the handle. The whispers had planted a seed of distrust, and he could no longer ignore its thorny tendrils. Stepping into his father's shoes, the Hastings Group boardroom doors felt like lead, their burnished brass chilling Edward's damp palms. His tie, a silken noose, tightened with each swallow. Inside, the air hung thick, a blend of antique wealth and unspoken demands, the ghosts of expensive leather, well-maintained wood, and his father's lingering cigar smoke. The old man's portrait, a scowling titan, dominated the far wall, a silent sentinel presiding over Edward's inaugural board meeting. He sank into the chair at the head of the mahogany expanse, a wave of queasiness churning in his gut, a potent brew of dread and inadequacy. He felt dwarfed by the paternal shadow, consumed by a legacy he hadn't yet earned. The assembled board, a squadron of gray suits and incisive minds, acknowledged him with respectful nods. He recognized several faces, longtime family allies, veteran employees, each a cornerstone of the Hastings Empire. Their polite greetings held an undertone of assessment, of judgment. He managed a feeble smile, acutely aware of their scrutiny. The meeting commenced with a quarterly earnings report, a torrent of figures and forecasts that danced before his eyes in a disorienting swirl. He struggled to concentrate, to decipher the arcane language, but the numbers swam, the charts seemed to mock him. Snippets of jargon reached him. Market flux, supply chain snags, strategic acquisitions, weighty phrases that remained frustratingly abstract. He cleared his throat, attempting to project a confidence he was far from feeling. Perhaps we might clarify the downturn in Sector C. Mr. Abernathy, the CFO, a man whose visage perpetually wore the mask of worry, launched into a convoluted explanation involving volatile commodity costs and unfavorable exchange rates. Edward's attention drifted. He nodded intermittently, feigning comprehension, praying he wouldn't be exposed. He scanned the room. Most of the members appeared engaged, some even scribbling notes. He felt like a charlatan, an interloper who had blundered into the wrong arena. His father, he imagined, would have been dissecting the report with surgical precision, demanding accountability, driving them all harder. The meeting crawled onward, each minute a stark reminder of his shortcomings. He struggled to keep pace with the discourse, to contribute meaningfully. He felt like a child playing dress-up, pretending to command a vessel he lacked the skill to navigate. During a momentary pause, a younger man, perched precariously at the edge of the table, leaned forward. Gregory Davies, head of marketing, a relative newcomer to the Hastings Group. Edward recalled his father's passing mention of him, something about fresh blood and novel perspectives. Mr. Hastings, Gregory began, his tone smooth and self-assured, I believe I have a few ideas that might address the concerns regarding Sector C. Edward seized the opportunity like a drowning man clutching at driftwood. Please, Gregory, enlighten us. Gregory straightened, practically radiating enthusiasm. Our current marketing strategy for Sector C is, well, frankly, antiquated. It's targeting the wrong demographic. We're clinging to traditional print when we should be harnessing digital platforms. Think influencer outreach, tailored social media, interactive experiences. He launched into a dynamic presentation, showcasing prototypes of online ads, viral concepts, and social media campaigns. Edward watched, captivated, as Gregory conjured a vision of a reinvigorated Sector C, fueled by cutting-edge marketing techniques. We need to communicate with consumers on their own terms, Gregory pressed on, his eyes sparkling with conviction. We need to craft a story, a brand that connects with their beliefs. We need to transform Sector C from a mere product into an immersive experience. Edward found himself agreeing, genuinely impressed by Gregory's vigor and creativity. He sensed potential in this man. This could be the spark they needed. But a nagging doubt began to surface. Was it all just smoke and mirrors? Did Gregory's schemes have real substance? Or were they merely fleeting fads destined to fizzle? He decided to test the waters. Gregory, these are intriguing concepts, but can you provide tangible data to support your projections? What is the projected ROI? Gregory hesitated for the briefest instant, his confident veneer momentarily cracking. Well, sir, the projections are still being refined, but based on industry data and preliminary analysis. He trailed off, his voice losing its initial force. Edward detected a vulnerability, a shallowness beneath the polished surface. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the expectant silence. With all due respect, Mr. Davies, your proposals seem overly optimistic. We have attempted similar tactics in the past, with limited effect. Other board members echoed the sentiment, voicing their reservations. The atmosphere in the room seemed to darken, the mood turning critical. Gregory's assured demeanor faltered under the weight of their shared skepticism. Edward felt a pang of sympathy for the young man. He had been so eager to impress, so brimming with ideas, only to be dismissed by the establishment. He knew that feeling all too well. He raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Gentlemen, let's not reject Gregory's ideas out of hand. He's right. We need to embrace new avenues. However, we also need to be grounded. Gregory, I appreciate your passion, but we need to see the numbers. Develop a comprehensive plan supported by verifiable data. Demonstrate the ROI, and then we'll talk. Gregory nodded, his face burning slightly. Yes, sir. I understand. The meeting lumbered forward, but Edward found his attention divided. He glanced at his father's portrait, the stern features seemingly mocking his efforts. He was trying, truly trying, but but he felt utterly adrift, woefully unprepared. He was attempting to fill shoes that were far too large, and he feared he was about to trip and fall. As the meeting finally adjourned, Gregory approached him. "Mr. Hastings, thank you for listening to what I had to say." Edward forced a smile. "Don't mention it, Gregory. Just do your due diligence." He watched Gregory depart, his shoulders slightly stooped. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed a reflection of his own frailty. Remaining behind, alone in the echoing boardroom, the burden of his father's legacy pressed down on him. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. He needed assistance. He needed someone intimately familiar with the Hastings Group, someone he could confide in, someone who could guide him through this labyrinth of business and expectation. His gaze returned to the portrait. His father's eyes seemed to pierce him, a silent indictment. He closed his eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He had a steep climb ahead, and he questioned his ability to make it to the summit. Subtle advice. The dining room air, thick with the opulent fragrance of saffron risotto, stood in sharp opposition to the austere aroma of antique wood and inherited wealth that permeated the Hastings Group's boardroom. Edward mechanically pushed the risotto around his plate, the day's burdens a crushing weight on his shoulders. Hours had dissolved into a blur of reviewing financial forecasts, parrying questions that flew far above his head, and robotically agreeing to discussions he barely grasped. Across from him, Milana ate with an almost regal composure. He'd caught her studying him before, her dark, perceptive eyes missing nothing. An uncomfortable scrutiny, yet compelling. "A trying day?" she inquired, her voice a low, melodious current against the backdrop of clinking crystal and silver. Edward exhaled heavily. Putting it mildly, it's like trying to translate an alien tongue. A constant barrage of jargon and acronyms, with the unspoken expectation of instant comprehension. Milana set down her silverware. "Perhaps I could offer some clarity." Edward arched an eyebrow, a derisive retort already forming. "And what exactly qualifies you to advise on corporate finance, Milana?" "More than you presume," she countered, a glint of resolve in her voice. "Managing my family's assets in Irkutsk necessitated a certain fluency in international commerce and investment strategies. Principles remain the same, irrespective of geography." He paused, the ingrained arrogance of his upbringing clashing with a spark of nascent interest. "Fine. Enlighten me. What stroke of genius do you possess regarding Hastings Group's floundering textiles division?" Milana refused to take the bait of his condescension. Instead, she articulated calmly, "Gregory's proposal concerning sustainable fabrics. You dismissed it out of hand." His data was non-existent, Edward defended, instantly bristling. "Good intentions don't balance the ledger." "Perhaps not alone," Milana conceded. "But vision does. The market landscape is evolving. Consumers are exhibiting a heightened awareness of their ecological footprint. To disregard this shift is to ignore an approaching tsunami." He scoffed. Every marketing director touts some fashionable trend to justify their spending. Empty rhetoric. Rhetoric that lines the pockets of companies who adapt. Milana retorted, her gaze unwavering. Gregory's concept transcended mere sustainable fabrics. He envisioned reducing production expenses and minimizing waste, constructing a brand identity that resonates with an expanding consumer base. It's not simply about going green, it's about operational efficiency and attracting a new clientele. Edward waved a dismissive hand. "Time will tell. I require quantifiable results, not abstract theories." He returned to his risotto, ending the discussion. The subsequent Wednesday's board meeting unfolded as a slow, agonizing descent into despair. The textiles division was bleeding money at an accelerated rate. Several board members subtly, and not so subtly, questioned Edward's direction, their words laced with veiled barbs. "Perhaps a reversion to our traditional strengths. Edward, Mr. Abernathy, the board's elder statesman and a powerful voice, intoned, his gaze pointed and penetrating. We shouldn't chase these ephemeral fads. Edward felt his jaw clench. He'd dedicated the past few days to dissecting the division's performance reports, desperately seeking a remedy. He presented a revised action plan emphasizing cost containment and production optimization, but the board remained unconvinced. These are merely surface-level adjustments. Edward, Ms. Du Bois, the head of legal, stated, her tone cutting. We require a wholesale realignment of strategy. He felt ensnared, stifled by the weight of expectations and the growing acknowledgement that he was in over his head. He suppressed the urge to snap back, to defend his choices, knowing it would only underscore his vulnerability. Later that evening, secluded in his study with a tumbler of scotch, Milana entered. Devoid of a word, she approached the fireplace and coaxed the dying flames. The revitalized fire provided a flickering counterpoint to the hush. They were right, you know, Edward confessed, his voice strained. My plan, it was a flimsy patch on a gaping hole. Milana turned to face him, her expression obscured by the dimness. Did you examine the data Gregory provided? Edward hesitated, admitting to himself that he hadn't. He'd skimmed it, writing it off as excessively optimistic too idealistic. Not thoroughly. I was searching for irrefutable evidence, something tangible. And you found none, Milana observed, her voice gentle yet firm. Because the evidence doesn't yet exist. You have to generate it. He met her gaze, taken aback by the intensity that burned in her eyes. What do you mean? Gregory's proposal represented a long-term bet. The preliminary figures may appear modest, but the potential for future expansion is substantial. You rejected it because it didn't align with your established notions of a triumphant business model. A dawning understanding broke through. Milana wasn't simply offering guidance. She was exposing his prejudices, forcing him to confront his inadequacies. He had fixated on replicating his father's triumphs, blinding him to the opportunities unfolding before him. The market for sustainable materials is projected to experience exponential growth in the coming half-decade, Milana continued, her voice softening. Consumers are demonstrating a willingness to pay more for ethically sourced, environmentally responsible products. This isn't a passing fancy, Edward. It's a fundamental realignment of consumer priorities. He swallowed a mouthful of his scotch. The bitter liquid possessed an unexpected, purifying quality. So, your recommendation? Milana approached his desk and retrieved Gregory's proposal. She perused the pages, her brow furrowed in concentration. Allocate a modest portion of the budget to a trial run. Put Gregory's ideas to the test within a defined market. Compile empirical data. Should it prove successful, scale up the program. Should it falter, you haven't jeopardized everything. It was a straightforward, pragmatic solution, a strategy to mitigate the risk and explore a prospect with potential for growth. A flicker of hope ignited within him, a spark of possibility. What about Abernathy and Du Bois? He asked, the disapproval of the board still weighing heavily upon him. They'll never give it the green light. Milana smiled, a rare and transformative sight. Then you'll have to sway them. Present the data, highlight the upside, and prove that you're willing to embrace calculated risks. He looked at her, truly saw her for the first time. He saw not just a veiled woman, but a keen intelligence, a tactical mind, and a quiet inner strength that belied her unassuming appearance. Thank you, he voiced, the words feeling insufficient but heartfelt. Milana simply inclined her head. They were partners. Edward was beginning to understand. Her family's prosperity and continued existence hinged on mutual support and collaboration, and she would not stand idly by while Hastings Group faltered, placing everything they held dear in jeopardy. The thorn threat. The words blurred, dissolving into shimmering distortions under the glare of the late afternoon sun slicing through the Hastings Group boardroom windows. Edward scanned the clause yet again, each pass a leaden weight pressing on his temples. Alastair Finch, the family solicitor, punctuated the strained silence with a dry cough. As you can see, Edward, Finch intoned, his voice a monotonous hum. Your fathers will specify that in the event of a takeover attempt, the controlling interest immediately transfers to you. The shares were previously held in trust. A chill snaked through Edward as he looked up. A takeover? What attempt? Finch's habitually placid face betrayed a fleeting discomfort as he adjusted his spectacles. Thorn Industries. They launched a hostile bid this morning. It's dominating financial news cycles. The color leached from Edward's face. Thorn. Marcus Thorn. A single, unpleasant encounter at a charity gala surfaced in his memory. The predatory grin and eyes that seemed to dissect, not observe. He dismissed him as another hungry climber. He hadn't understood Thorn had set his sights on the peak itself. How? How is this happening? Edward stammered. The question aimed at the room's occupants, at his father's memory, at the cruel irony dogging his every step. A fine sheen of perspiration dotted his forehead. The textile division was hemorrhaging cash, his efforts to revitalize it mired in bureaucratic quicksand and his own timidity. He'd been so consumed by internal power struggles, he'd missed the approaching army at the gates. His phone vibrated insistently. He ignored it. Finch droned on, seemingly oblivious to Edward's mounting distress. Thorn is proposing a generous premium over the current trading price. An enticing prospect for shareholders, especially given the textile sector's recent woes. Blast the textiles, Edward snapped, earning a disapproving pursing of Finch's lips. Another insistent vibration from his phone. He glanced down. Gregory, the young designer, championing the sustainable fabrics. He silenced the call, his mind a chaotic vortex of panicked calculations and self-reproach. He should have been bolder. He should have moved faster. What recourse do we have, Alistair? He finally asked, his voice regaining some semblance of control. Finch outlined the potential defenses, poison pills, soliciting a white knight, legal challenges. Each option sounded more desperate and impractical than the last. The brutal truth. Hastings' group was exposed, and Marcus Thorn was closing in. He pushed back from the table with abrupt force, scattering documents across the polished mahogany. I need to immerse myself in this. Give me everything, Alistair. Every document, every analysis. I need to understand Thorn's strategy inside and out. As he exited the boardroom, the phone buzzed once more. This time, he answered. Hastings, he stated tersely. Edward, Arthur from CNBC. We're live in 5. We need your reaction to Thorn's offer. Live? Edward's stomach plummeted. I haven't scheduled any interview. Thorn just concluded a press conference. He's portraying Hastings' group as an antiquated relic, ripe for a shakeup. He's practically inviting a confrontation. Edward cursed under his breath. Give me 10 minutes. He raked a hand through his already unruly hair. He needed to find Milana. She possessed an uncanny ability to cut through the extraneous, to locate the central issue with unerring precision. But where was she? He discovered her in the textiles division, amidst the clatter of looms and the profusion of unfinished materials, engaged in an animated discussion with Gregory. The image, their heads close together over a swatch of vivid, environmentally responsible cloth, ignited a spark of hope amidst the encroaching gloom. He walked toward them, his footsteps resounding in the vast space. Gregory's face betrayed a hint of apprehension as he straightened. Milana turned, her expression inscrutable. We have a problem, Edward announced, his voice strained. Thorn Industries is initiating a hostile takeover. Milana's eyes narrowed perceptibly. Thorn? What is his play here? He perceives weakness. He believes he can dismantle us piece by piece. Edward swept his hand to encompass the factory floor. And perhaps he's right. Gregory spoke with unexpected resolve. This fabric, this could be a game changer, Mr. Hastings. It could shatter Thorn's assumptions. Edward shifted his gaze from Gregory's impassioned face to Milana's resolute stare. He saw a possible lifeline, a means of resistance. But it would necessitate placing his trust in them, placing his faith in something he didn't fully grasp. Compile the data, Gregory, he commanded, his voice strengthening. Demonstrate to me the potential of this fabric. He pivoted toward Milana. I require your insight. I need you to illuminate what I'm missing. Milana offered a subtle smile. I will assist you, Edward. but you must be prepared to see. He left them to their calculations and started toward the impromptu press conference. As he walked, Thorne's pronouncements echoed in his thoughts, each syllable a provocation. He wouldn't permit Thorne to prevail. He wouldn't allow his father's legacy to be extinguished. He would stand and fight. The camera flashes erupted as he approached the microphone. He straightened his tie, took a steadying breath, and met the expectant stares of the assembled reporters. "Marcus Thorne," he declared, his voice resonating with newfound conviction, "is misinformed. Hastings Group is not an antiquated relic. We are evolving, and we welcome a confrontation. United front." The vast expanse of the mahogany table in the Hastings Group boardroom stretched between Edward and Milana like a silent chasm. Golden light flooded in, spotlighting drifting particles in the air, a delicate dance that belied the tense atmosphere. Marcus Thorne's predatory pursuit of the company hung heavy, a palpable threat. Edward tinted his fingers, the burden of inheritance a tangible weight on his shoulders. He's accelerating. Lawyers are swarming. Analysts are buzzing. The carrion birds are circling. Milana, poised to his left, remained unmoved. Her obsidian eyes, typically soft with quiet understanding, now glinted with sharp focus. Thorne's initial gambit was ambitious, yet anticipated. This has been a long-term play for him. Her words, delivered with careful enunciation, were devoid of overt feeling yet rich with insight. He edged forward, finding a small measure of solace in the table's cool surface. "Years? I imagined. I thought it was a reaction to my father's. The unspoken sentiment, his father's passing, resonated in the room's silence. Victor Hastings was a force to be reckoned with," Milana observed, her gaze unwavering. "Thorne wouldn't have dared such a maneuver in his lifetime. He's opportunistic, not reckless." A spark of indignation flickered within Edward. Was she implying he lacked his father's stature? Yet the matter-of-fact tone, devoid of personal attack, checked his defensiveness. He needed her expertise, not a judgment of his character. So, his endgame? More than just majority control. Milana picked up a pen, idly rotating it between her fingers. Dismemberment, sale of assets, leveraging of resources, a systematic draining of the company. He sees no value in Hastings Group as an entity, only in its individual parts. A chill snaked down Edward's spine. He knew firsthand the care his father poured into building the Hastings Group from nothing, nurturing each division and creating a culture of fierce allegiance. To witness its disintegration, it was unthinkable. "He can't," Edward stated, his voice strained. "I won't allow it." "Then a strategy is paramount," Milana replied, setting the pen down with a soft click. "A strategy that foresees his machinations and counteracts his advantages." Edward abandoned his seat, pacing the room's length. "Our legal team is constructing a defense, naturally. Poison pills, shareholder protections, those are merely reactions," Milana interjected, her voice steady. "Thorne will have accounted for them. We must anticipate, preempt. We require an understanding of his vulnerabilities." He ceased his pacing, pivoting to face her. "And you believe you possess that understanding?" A hint of a smile played on her lips. "I have immersed myself in Hastings Group. Your father's blueprints, triumphs, missteps. He excelled at playing the long game, but he also had areas where he was less attentive. Blind spots." Edward's brow furrowed. He'd always regarded his father as indomitable, a pillar of industry. The notion of inherent weaknesses, it was unsettling. Milana moved toward the far wall, where a commanding portrait of Victor Hastings presided. She paused before it, her gaze riveted to the stern, resolute features. He was exceptional at acquisition, at expansion, yet he marginalized the heart of the operation. He fixated on outward growth, neglecting internal advancement. Edward followed her, stopping at her side. "Meaning, Hastings Group is anchored in heritage, in reputation. A strength, undeniably, but also a point of weakness. Thorne will exploit this. He'll depict us as obsolete, clinging to antiquated methods. He'll promise a more innovative, contemporary future to investors. He considered Gregory's designs, the eco-friendly textiles, the dramatic deviation from the company's established brand. Could that be the linchpin? So we must innovate, demonstrate that we're not mired in the past. Innovation is essential, certainly, Milana concurred, turning to meet his gaze. However, it's insufficient. We must also reinforce what Hastings Group represents. Reconnect with our core ethos. Ethos, Edward scoffed softly. This is business, Milana, not a philanthropic endeavor. Ethos is not contradictory to business, she countered, her tone sharpening. It is the bedrock upon which trust is founded, and trust will ultimately sway the shareholders. He weighed her words, recognizing their inherent validity. His father always emphasized the importance of relationships, of unwavering commitment. But somewhere along the line, those tenets had been relegated to a lower priority than profits. "What course of action do you propose?" he inquired, his voice now gentler, more open. Milana returned to the table, selecting a company dossier. Hastings Group boasts a long-standing commitment to community engagement, support for local charities, investment in education. These initiatives have been largely ignored recently, overshadowed by the pursuit of revenue. So, we must remind people we're about more than the bottom line, Edward realized, understanding taking shape. That we provide support, contribute to the greater good. Precisely. Milana opened the dossier, directing his attention to a specific section. This initiative, the Hastings Foundation Scholarship Program, highly successful, yet discontinued 5 years ago due to budget constraints. We should reinstate it. Edward agreed with a nod. And beyond that, we must amplify our dedication to sustainability, she continued. Gregory's designs are a prime example of innovation that aligns with our ethos. We must showcase them, illustrate that we are investing in a future that is both lucrative and responsible. Over the ensuing hours, they delved into the company's financial reports, dissecting market patterns and brainstorming tactics. Edward found himself completely absorbed in Milana's insights, struck by her command of the company's complexities and her ability to perceive beneath the surface. He conceded that he had underestimated her, his judgment clouded by assumptions and his own expectations. As twilight descended, painting the boardroom in lengthy shadows, they had forged a strategy interwoven with innovation and tradition, profitability and principles, strength and vulnerability. A strategy destined to not only defend Hastings Group against Thorne's hostile advance, but to solidify its dominance within the industry. Edward relaxed back into his chair, a wave of guarded optimism washing over him. He still faced an arduous journey, but for the first time since his father's passing, he felt not utterly alone. He possessed an ally, a confidant, a strategist, and together, they would champion the future of Hastings Group. "Thank you, Milana," he expressed, his voice sincere. "I couldn't have navigated this alone." She met his gaze, her dark eyes inscrutable. "We are a team, Edward, and we will confront this together." Unveiling the past. The Hastings Group boardroom, typically a shrine to mahogany and male dominance, possessed a different aura. The air felt lighter, the atmosphere less constricting. Perhaps it was Milana's doing, or maybe the dire reality had finally banished the spectral aroma of Edward's father's cigars and defunct strategies. Milana stood before the holographic projector, a slender figure dwarfed by the monumental room. Yet, her eyes held a fervent intensity as she navigated data streams, charting the corporation's trajectory, its ascents, and, latterly, its alarming plunges. The figures painted an unflattering portrait of Edward's leadership, yet were presented without accusation, purely clinical assessment. As you can observe, Milana began, her tone even and measured. The decline commenced roughly 5 years prior, concurrent with your father's increasing preoccupation with legacy projects and dwindling funds allocated to nascent technologies. Edward watched, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. He'd understood, intellectually, the dubious nature of his father's choices, driven more by sentimentality than foresight. But witnessing the stark, irrefutable evidence delivered a visceral jolt. He leaned forward, elbows planted on the polished surface, feeling the chill permeate his skin. "Thorne has been tracking this, hasn't he?" he murmured, the question more a statement. Milana confirmed with a nod. "He's been observing and biding his time. He recognizes Hastings Group's vulnerability, its ripe state for exploitation. His proposition isn't about acquiring a company. It's about its systematic dismantling, asset stripping, and leaving behind only a husk." The projector's display transformed, now presenting market analysis, competitor metrics, and projections for the coming fiscal year. Milana moved with lithe precision, highlighting salient points with a stylus, her gestures efficient and concise. "However," she continued, a subtle inflection coloring her voice, "Thorne's strategy also betrays a chink in his armor. He's betting on the perception of Hastings Group as a dinosaur, resistant to evolution and bereft of innovation. He's underestimated our capacity for reinvention." Edward found himself captivated by her poise. He'd anticipated, perhaps, a veiled, "I warned you," a subtle note of triumph. Instead, he encountered only unwavering resolve, a single-minded focus on remediation. This was a far cry from the demure figure he'd initially sized up. This Milana was a force. He recalled their early interactions, his own impatience and condescension. He'd regarded her as a mere obligation, an obstacle to navigate. Now, he perceived her as an ally, perhaps his sole one. "How do we turn that weakness against him?" he inquired, shoving aside the burgeoning guilt and locking onto the challenge. Milana faced him, a spark of what looked like respect flickering in her eyes. "We demonstrate the antithesis. We amplify our commitment to sustainable methodology, our investment in pioneering technologies, our dedication to the community. We illustrate that Hastings Group is not a relic, but a company with eyes fixed on the horizon." She tapped the screen, calling up slides, showcasing Hastings Group's neglected outreach programs, the largely forgotten initiatives that once formed the bedrock of the company's identity. "Your father," Milana stated, maintaining a neutral tone, prioritized expanding the corporation's dominion, frequently at the detriment of its local roots. These programs, while seemingly insignificant, represent a vital component of Hastings Group's character. They also serve as a potent rejoinder to Thorne's image as an unfeeling corporate predator. A realization dawned on Edward, the nascent outline of a plan. It transcended mere financials and market positions. It hinged on shaping perception, on rekindling people's memory of what Hastings Group embodied, what it still could. "We need to spotlight our sustainability initiatives," he voiced, thinking aloud. "The Solar Array Project, the Green Tech Alliance, we've buried those triumphs under layers of red tape. We must drag them into the light." Milana concurred. "Precisely. And we must underscore our devotion to employee well-being. Thorne's notoriety for slashing costs and jobs precedes him. We can leverage that to our advantage, positioning ourselves as the responsible, ethical alternative." An idea struck Edward with sudden force. The negotiation. We must commandeer the narrative. We cannot allow Thorne to dictate the terms. "He'll anticipate defensiveness, knee-jerk reactions," Milana predicted, keeping pace with his thoughts. "He'll arrive with a derisory bid, aiming to demoralize you, to trap you. Then we wrong-foot him," Edward declared, a flicker of excitement igniting within him. "We present our own proposition, not a counteroffer, but a proposal, a partnership, a collaborative venture centered on sustainable technology." Milana's lips curved into a ghost of a smile. "Audacious, risky, but potentially effective. It would compel him to unveil his true intentions, to reveal his hand. And if he rejects it," Edward pressed, "then we know his interest lies not in collaboration," Milana responded, her voice hardening. "His only aim is annihilation, and we resist him with every weapon we possess." They immersed themselves in Thorne's past dealings, scrutinizing financial statements, and devising a negotiation strategy that was both bold and meticulously constructed. Milana's expertise in market dynamics and corporate jurisprudence proved invaluable, and Edward found himself increasingly reliant on her insight. He absorbed her analysis of potential pitfalls, her forecasts of Thorne's stratagems, and her proposed countermeasures. As the first streaks of dawn kissed the boardroom windows, Edward leaned back, drained but strangely electrified. He glanced at Milana, calmly arranging her notes, her features bathed in the ethereal light of the projector. He still didn't fully grasp her essence. This woman who had arrived so unexpectedly, this woman who challenged his assumptions and perceived potential where he saw only ruin. But one thing was certain. He no longer faced this battle alone, and with Milana at his side, he had a real chance. He registered the strength in her, the steely core concealed beneath her refined exterior. He knew, intuitively, that whatever awaited them, they would confront it together. A partnership born of crisis, bound by shared purpose, and perhaps something deeper. The negotiation was scheduled for that day. Edward understood it would be the pivotal moment of his life. The destiny of Hastings' group, and perhaps his own, hung precariously in the balance. He rose, stretching his stiffened limbs. "Thank you, Milana," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity. "For everything." She met his gaze, her eyes direct and resolute. "We are united in this, Edward. Now, let us demonstrate to Marcus Thorne what Hastings' group is truly capable of." Victory in a new perspective. The boardroom air hung thick with anticipation, smelling faintly of old mahogany and desperation. Thorne, a predatory gleam in his eyes, leaned back in his chair, a smugness that grated on Edward's nerves. "So, Hastings," he drawled, the word dripping with condescension, "have you reconsidered my offer? It's exceptionally generous, given your current circumstances." Edward clenched his jaw. Generous? It was highway robbery, thinly veiled. He glanced at Milana, seated beside him, her face an impassive mask. But in her steady gaze, he saw a quiet confidence that mirrored his own resolve. They had worked tirelessly, burning the midnight oil, poring over figures, rallying their allies. They weren't going down without a fight. "My answer remains the same, Thorne," Edward said, his voice firm, devoid of the tremor he'd felt just days ago. "Hastings' group is not for sale." Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Sentimentality will be your downfall. Hastings, you're clinging to a sinking ship." "Perhaps." Milana spoke for the first time, her voice a low, melodic counterpoint to the tension in the room. "But sinking ships can be salvaged. And sometimes the most valuable treasures are found in the depths." Thorne's eyes flickered towards her, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features. He clearly hadn't expected her to speak. "The veiled bride speaks," he sneered. Such wisdom from behind a curtain. Edward felt a surge of anger, but he held it in check. Thorne was trying to bait him, to break his composure. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "My wife is more insightful than you give her credit for," he retorted, his voice edged with steel. "And she's right. We've secured the necessary investment to revitalize Hastings' group. Your hostile takeover is officially unsuccessful." He presented the documents, the contracts, the guarantees, each one a nail in the coffin of Thorne's ambitions. Thorne's face darkened. He scanned the papers, his eyes narrowed, searching for a loophole, a flaw, anything to cling to. But there was nothing. This is impossible," he sputtered, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "You can't have—" "Who would be foolish enough?" "People who believe in the future of Hastings' group," Milana replied calmly. "People who see the potential, not just the immediate profit." Thorne slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. "You haven't heard the last of me, Hastings," he snarled, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over." "Perhaps not," Edward said, rising to his feet. "But for now it is." "Security," he called out, and two burly men appeared, flanking Thorne. "Please escort Mr. Thorne off the premises." As Thorne was led away, Fuming and defeated, Edward felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. It was over. They had done it. He turned to Milana, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "We did it," he said, relief flooding his voice. Milana inclined her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. Indeed, the celebrations were muted, a quiet acknowledgement of a battle won, not a war ended. Edward gathered the key employees, the ones who had stayed loyal, who had believed in him, in Hastings Group. He addressed them, his voice filled with gratitude and renewed purpose. "We faced a crisis, and we emerged stronger," he said. "We learned valuable lessons. We will rebuild, we will innovate, and we will create a Hastings Group that is not only successful, but also sustainable, ethical, and responsible." Later that evening, after the last of the employees had left, Edward found Milana in his father's study, the room bathed in the soft glow of the desk lamp. She was examining a collection of old photographs, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you looking at?" Edward asked, stepping into the room. "These photographs," she said, turning to him. "They tell a story of ambition, of innovation, but also of missed opportunities." Edward sat down beside her, picking up on the photographs. It was a picture of his father, Victor Hastings, young and full of promise, standing beside a prototype of an electric car. "He was ahead of his time," Edward said, a hint of sadness in his voice. "But he lost his way. He prioritized profit over progress," Milana said softly. "He forgot the importance of sustainability." Edward nodded. "He did," he admitted, "and I almost made the same mistake." He looked at Milana, his gaze sincere. "I underestimated you," he said. "I was blinded by my own prejudices, by the expectations of others. I thought you were just a convenient arrangement." Milana remained silent, her expression unreadable. "But you were so much more," Edward continued. "You were the one who saw the flaws in our strategy, who identified the opportunities we were missing. You were the one who saved Hastings Group." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Thank you, Milana. I truly mean that." Milana finally met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "We saved Hastings Group, Edward," she said. "Together." He smiled. "Together," he echoed. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. It wasn't a gesture of obligation or convenience. It was a gesture of partnership, of respect, of something more. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he didn't want to face it without her. The victory over Thorne wasn't just about saving a company. It was about opening his eyes to a new perspective, a new way of seeing the world, and a new appreciation for the woman who stood beside him. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that their journey was only just beginning. Beyond the veil, the triumph over Thorne left a curious vacuum. The Hastings Group breathed easier, the immediate danger dispelled, yet the air buzzed with unasked questions, a palpable shift hanging over everyone. For Edward, one query eclipsed all others: the woman who shared his life, his estate, and increasingly his vision. Milana. He discovered her in the library, a space his father had largely ignored, now awash in the amber glow of late afternoon, filtering through immense windows. She was perched at the vast mahogany desk, not lost in the antique volumes lining the walls, but absorbed in her laptop, a delicate crease marring her brow. He caught the distinctive fragrance of sandalwood interlaced with a lighter, floral note that seemed utterly her own. He lingered in the doorway, observing her. "Absorbed in something?" he inquired, the question gentler than it once would have been. Milana glanced up, offering a small, almost tentative smile. "Just some research," she demurred, snapping the laptop shut. "Research? On what precisely?" He detached himself from the doorframe, crossing to the desk, his curiosity piqued. She hesitated, a fleeting shadow of doubt in her gaze. "Economics, primarily, and some historical perspectives. I find it grounding." Edward arched a brow. "Grounding? Most find it anything, but—" "It's about discerning patterns," she countered, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Predictable reactions to stimuli, the ebb and flow of resources, the mechanics of human behavior. Fundamentally, it's logical. He settled on the desk's edge, close enough to see the faint luminescence of the screen reflected in her dark irises. So, you're an economist then? Milana shook her head. Not professionally, though I did complete a doctorate in economic history and political thought. Edward stared, genuinely taken aback. A doctorate? From where? A hint of disbelief colored his tone. The London School of Economics, she replied evenly. Before arriving here, I was preparing for a position at Oxford. He felt the floor drop away. All this time, he presumed, no, allowed himself to believe, she was merely a woman constrained by convention, chosen for him without regard for her own ambitions or intellect. He had registered the veil, the quiet reserve, and filled the gaps with his own biases. Why hadn't you mentioned this? He asked, the question tinged with guilt and genuine inquisitiveness. Milana looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It didn't seem pertinent, and I feared it might be unwelcome. He reached out, gently encompassing one of her hands in his. Her skin felt smooth, almost cool. Unwelcome? Milana, your insights save the company. You possess a keener understanding of the market than anyone I know. He recalled how calmly she had dissected Thorne's strategy, pinpointing the weaknesses in his arguments, articulating a compelling vision for the Hastings Group's future. Blinded by ingrained tradition and his own insecurities, he had almost missed the brilliance before him. Tell me more, he urged softly. Tell me about your research, your work. Tell me about Oxford. And she did. She spoke of her dedication to economic history, her fascination with the ascent and decline of empires, her conviction in the power of sustainable growth. She detailed her research on the consequences of technological progress on societal inequality, her aspiration to forge a more equitable and just world. As she spoke, Edward listened, captivated not just by her words but by the passion that ignited within her. He perceived a woman who was astute, driven, and deeply devoted to making a difference. He saw a partner, not merely in name, but in every meaningful sense. The spell shattered with a soft rap on the library door. Milana tensed imperceptibly, withdrawing her hand from Edward's. Come in, Edward said, turning towards the portal. Omar Hassan entered, his face etched with concern. He offered a curt nod to Edward, his gaze settling immediately on Milana. They are requesting your presence, he stated, his voice subdued and urgent. Milana rose swiftly, a flicker of worry crossing her features. What is it, Omar? What's happened? It is nothing for you to trouble yourself over, Bint al-Am, he said, using a familiar term signifying daughter of my uncle. He paused, then added, they're concerned for your welfare. About your position here. Edward frowned, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Who exactly is they, Omar? Omar averted his gaze, his jaw tight. It is unimportant, Effendi. I only wish to speak with my cousin. Milana placed a hand on Omar's arm, her expression softening. Thank you, Omar. I will be there shortly. Omar nodded again, his eyes lingering on Milana for a moment before he departed, the door closing silently behind him. Milana sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. Family affairs, she murmured, her voice devoid of inflection. Is everything all right? Edward asked, his worry genuine. Milana hesitated again, then shook her head. It is complicated. My family harbors certain expectations. They are apprehensive about my being here in this world. But you're secure here, Milana. You're my wife. I know, she conceded, but the words rang hollow. Edward knew he couldn't force her confidence, but he craved understanding. Her world, her family, her anxieties. He wanted to evolve beyond a husband and title alone. He yearned to be a true confidant, someone she could trust implicitly. Milana, he said, clasping her hand once more. I want to comprehend. I want to support you. Whatever it is, we'll confront it together. She met his gaze, her eyes searching. He detected a spark of hope, a glimmer of trust, and something deeper, more intricate, eluding definition. Thank you, Edward, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That means more than words can express. He squeezed her hand gently. We're united in this, remember? Partners. He now viewed the veil not as a partition, but as a symbol of the myriad layers of identity and expectation she navigated, and the strength required to reveal her authentic self. The real task, he comprehended, lay in deciphering what existed beyond it, beyond customs and assumptions, surpassing preconceptions and biases. The genuine effort involved earning her confidence and building a partnership genuinely equal, truly resolute. The reason why? The setting sun painted long shadows across the manicured expanse of Hastings Manor's lawn. Edward observed Milana among the rose bushes, each movement a study in grace and intent. The rose's fragrance, normally a balm to his soul, was today overshadowed by a persistent unease. Weeks had elapsed since the gala, since the shocked intake of breath and the subsequent buzz that trailed Milana's unveiled appearance. He'd naively believed that revealing her face would silence the inquiries. He was mistaken. Gravel crunched underfoot as he approached. Milana remained engrossed in her task, deftly pruning a stubborn thorn. The roses seemed to flourish, he commented, a mere attempt to breach the silence. They demand diligent care, she responded, her voice barely audible, like a secret shared with the wind. As do most things that matter. He paused. This was treacherous territory, a breeding ground for assumptions and ignorance. Yet, comprehension was paramount. Milana, he began, carefully calibrating his words. Since the gala, I've been puzzling over something. The veil. She stilled, gloved hand gripping the shears. Slowly, she turned, her gaze, the one constant in all the years he'd known her, meeting his. Puzzling over what, Edward? Why you concealed yourself for so long? The question felt clumsy, yet he lacked the finesse to phrase it better. He detected a fleeting emotion in her depths, melancholy, resignation, before it vanished behind a carefully constructed mask. Setting down the shears and clipped stem in a wicker basket, she replied, There are layers to it, Edward, like the rose's petals, numerous and complex. He waited, allowing her to gather her thoughts. He'd learned that her words were precious, each one carefully considered. Initially, she continued, it was a form of protection, a bulwark. My family holds specific ideals, rigid expectations concerning a woman's role, conduct, and values. Edward frowned. He had registered the faint disapproval emanating from her relatives during their cursory meetings. He had dismissed it as a clash of their antiquated views with his modern outlook, failing to grasp the depth of their disagreement. Protection from your family? She inclined her head. And from the world at large. Concealment granted me the freedom to exist without judgment solely based on appearance. It provided a space for my intellect to be heard. His mind flashed back to their initial encounters, to his own flawed judgments about her. He had seen the veil, the quiet reserve, and instantly categorized her as, what? Docile? Unassuming? How utterly wrong he had been. So, it was a conscious decision. He pressed, needing affirmation. Not something imposed upon you. A choice, she affirmed, her expression direct. A multifaceted one, certainly, shaped by upbringing, influenced by societal pressures. But ultimately my choice. It enabled me to navigate a reality, often prioritizing superficiality over substance. He looked at her, truly saw her, recognizing not merely the woman he had married, but the person she had been, the choices she had embraced to safeguard herself and her mind. He recalled the numerous meetings where her insightful observations had been overlooked or dismissed by others. He himself had been complicit in that. And now, he inquired, why the unveiling? A faint smile touched her lips. The Hastings group was vulnerable, Edward. Our partnership demanded a different kind of strength. I needed to be visible, present, not merely a silent observer, but a proactive force. And she paused, her gaze locking with his, igniting a spark within him. I desired to dictate when and how I was perceived. not have it imposed upon me by external forces. He understood. It wasn't about assimilating into his world. It was about seizing agency over her own narrative. It was about defining herself on her own terms. He pondered his own choices, the predetermined path he had been expected to tread. He had inherited the Hastings Group, a legacy founded on his father's ambition and occasionally dubious methods. He had initially resisted that responsibility, clinging to the carefree existence he had always known. Yet, Milana's presence, her understated strength, had compelled him to confront his limitations, his own biases. "I underestimated you, Milana," he conceded, the words brimming with sincerity. Profoundly. She offered no direct response, but he glimpsed comprehension in her gaze. She didn't seek an apology, but recognition. Acknowledgement of the woman she was, the woman she had always been, obscured beneath layers of custom and expectations. "I yearn to comprehend," he pressed, "about your family, about your life prior to me." "It's complex, Edward," she murmured, a hint of weariness underlying her tone. "My family, they construe my position here as a betrayal, a rejection of our heritage, of our tenets." "But you're strengthening the company. You're improving things," he countered. "That's not their interpretation. They believe I should devote myself to other pursuits, to family, to tradition, not to business, not to you." The final word hung suspended in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. He understood that their union extended beyond a mere business arrangement. It was a symbol, a proclamation that challenged the very bedrock of her family's convictions. He reached out, enfolding her hand in his. Her skin felt silken, roughened only slightly from nurturing the roses. "I want to meet them, formally, to appreciate their perspective." She studied him, surprised. "Are you certain? It would be fraught with difficulty." "Nothing worthwhile ever comes easily," he asserted, his voice resolute. He meant it. He was no longer the privileged heir, blindly emulating his father's path. He was Edward Hastings, a man who had discovered an unexpected ally in an enigmatic woman. And he was prepared to fight for that alliance, even if it entailed confronting the complexities of her past. The sun descended below the horizon, bathing the garden in a soft, golden luminescence. He stood alongside Milana, hand clasped in hand, the sweet perfume of roses permeating the air. The questions persisted, unanswered, yet they were now coupled with a burgeoning sense of purpose. He knew that the journey ahead would be arduous, fraught with obstacles and uncertainties. But he also recognized that he wasn't alone. He had Milana, her resilience, her intellect, her unwavering resolve. And together, they would confront whatever challenges lay ahead, defending her honor. The Hastings Group Charity Gala buzzed, a festive hum of tinkling crystal and practiced pleasantries filling the opulent ballroom. Usually adept at navigating such social quicksand, Edward felt a knot tighten in his chest. Since Milana's public emergence, he'd been vigilant, acutely aware of the speculative glances that tracked her every move. The unveiling, while her choice, a defiant stride towards independence, had also painted a target on her back. He'd detached himself from a droning monologue on renewable energy advancements, a topic his father would have dismissed, yet one Edward now found compelling thanks to Milana, and moved in her direction. She stood near a marble effigy of a forgotten deity, a pocket of tranquility amid the bustling throng. He spotted Eleanor Ainsworth and Serafina Du Bois, the notoriously acerbic gossip columnist, circling, predatory. He paused, a flicker of unease prickling his skin. He feigned fascination with a nearby floral centerpiece, a lofty cascade of ivory orchids, and eavesdropped. Quite the spectacle, wouldn't you agree? Eleanor purred, her voice coated in a sugary sweetness that grated on Edward's nerves. To present herself so openly, it smacks of a desperate bid for attention. Serafina, ever the opportunist, chuckled with dry amusement. She certainly garnered notice, darling. But what sort? Rumor has it she was sequestered for good reason. Some whisper of deformity. Others claim it's a calculated move to portray Hastings as enlightened. Either way, the air is thick with desperation. A wave of fierce anger washed over Edward. He knew Milana possessed a singularity, an uncommon spirit, but she was also remarkably intelligent, possessed sharp insight, and carried herself with a quiet grace utterly foreign to these women. He'd overheard the veiled jibes himself, the veiled commentary about her background, her intellect, her perceived social awkwardness. Hearing them voiced with such callous disregard, however, ignited a protective instinct he hadn't recognized within himself. He straightened, jaw clenched, and approached with studied composure that masked the turmoil roiling within. "Eleanor," he greeted, his tone deliberately even. "Serafina." Enjoying the revelry. Eleanor pivoted, her painted smile momentarily faltering before snapping back into place. "Edward, darling, we were just admiring the sculpture." She waved a hand dismissively towards the marble figure. "Precisely," Serafina echoed, her eyes narrowed. "Such a timeless embodiment of beauty, unlike some of the more avant-garde interpretations on display this evening." She aimed the barb squarely at Milana, her gaze lingering with undisguised disdain. Edward's grip tightened around his champagne flute. "Beauty," he countered, his voice gaining an edge, "lies in the beholder's eye, Serafina, and I find Milana to be exceptionally radiant, both inside and out." Eleanor's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Edward, really? We were merely engaging in polite discourse." "Polite discourse?" Edward scoffed, his patience fraying. "I overheard your polite discourse, and I consider it profoundly insulting. Milana is my wife, and I will not stand idly by while you denigrate her." He turned his full attention to Serafina. "And you, Serafina, as a journalist, are ethically bound to present facts, not peddle conjecture and perpetuate unfounded gossip. Your words carry weight, and I suggest you wield them with greater care in the future." Serafina, typically armed with a quick retort, appeared momentarily stunned by Edward's sudden and unexpected defense of his wife. However, she swiftly regained her composure, a predatory gleam returning to her eyes. Merely acknowledging the elephant in the room, "Edward, people are intrigued. They crave the narrative." "The narrative," Edward stated, his voice low and menacing, "is that Milana is an extraordinary woman, a vital asset to the Hastings Group and my wife. And if anyone takes exception to that, they can address their grievances with me." He turned his back, his posture conveying an unambiguous warning. He could feel their gazes burning into his spine, but he remained unfazed. He moved towards Milana, resolve hardening his stride. Milana had observed the exchange, her expression inscrutable. He couldn't discern whether she felt mortification, resentment, or simply weary resignation to the ever-present scrutiny. As he drew closer, he detected a spark in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or even appreciation. "Are you all right?" he inquired, his voice softening, his anger subsiding in her presence. She offered a slow nod. "I'm accustomed to such assessments." "You shouldn't have to be," he declared, his hand instinctively reaching out to envelop hers. Her skin felt cool beneath his touch. "They're wrong, Milana. They fail to perceive the real you." She raised her gaze to meet his, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a jolt through him. "And who do you believe I am, Edward?" He paused, searching for the precise words. "Someone formidable, astute, and infinitely more perceptive than they give you credit for. Someone deserving of respect and admiration, not whispers and judgment." A subtle smile graced her lips. "Thank you, Edward." He gently squeezed her hand. "I mean it, Milana. I might not have always comprehended you, but I'm trying, and I will champion your honor unfailingly." He knew it was a pledge, a commitment to stand shoulder to shoulder with her, not solely as her husband, but as her confidant, her advocate, and her friend. And as he met her gaze, he realized that defending her honor was, in essence, defending himself, defending his own evolving convictions, and defending the shared future they were forging. A gala of change. The desk's rich mahogany surface mirrored the amber glow of the lamp, stretching elongated shadows across the opulent space. Edward pivoted, the soft groan of aged leather the only sound accompanying his contemplation of the city's glittering tapestry visible beyond the panoramic window. Gone was the shadow of the takeover. In its place, a burgeoning sense of potential. The Hastings Group, against all odds, was not only surviving, but flourishing. Such an achievement warranted fanfare. "I'm contemplating a gala," he announced, turning towards Milana, who occupied the chaise lounge, a book resting in her lap. The hearth exhaled warmth, its flickering flames casting capricious patterns on the walls. Milana met his gaze, inquiry etched in her features. "A gala. Precisely. A grand affair. To express gratitude to our invaluable team, to celebrate this triumph, and to cement our position." He raked a hand through his dark hair, a nervous gesture, and to formally introduce you. He observed her reaction, acutely aware of her aversion to extravagant displays, to becoming a spectacle. "It's a chance to showcase the revitalized Hastings Group, the one we co-created. Driven by environmental consciousness, deeply rooted in social responsibility, undeniably successful." He silently urged her to recognize the strategic merit beyond any perceived superficiality. Closing her book, Milana marked the page with a graceful movement. "And what role do you envision for me?" Her voice, as always, held a serene quality. He rose and approached, maintaining a respectful distance. "Any role you choose. I want you to feel secure, to feel truly seen. This isn't about forcing you into a preordained role, Milana. It's about allowing the world to witness your essence, your accomplishments." A pause, a breath drawn for courage. "There's another aspect concerning the gala I wish to broach. It's a delicate subject, and I wish to convey that the ultimate decision rests entirely with you." Her brow knitted subtly, but she remained composed, awaiting his explanation. "The veil," he began, choosing each word with care. "I am aware it forms a part of your person, a symbol carrying layers of significance. However, I am also aware that it can act as a partition, engendering a perception of distance. The gala offers a prominent stage, a chance to reveal yourself, should you wish it." He raised a hand, preempting a response. "Please, feel no compulsion, Milana. The determination resides solely with you. I offer unwavering support, irrespective of her choice. I long for others to perceive you, the Milana I hold dear. Your brilliance, your elegance, your totality." He searched her face, attempting to decipher her emotions. Her expression remained enigmatic, a mask of practiced composure. He held his breath, awaiting her words. Finally, she responded, "Thank you, Edward, for such consideration. I shall reflect deeply on your words." He nodded, a tide of relief washing over him. It was all he could ask. "Naturally, there's ample time. The gala remains weeks away. In the interim," he continued, attempting a lighter tone, "we have a guest list to refine and a theme to select. I initially considered sustainable futures, though I remain open." A delicate smile graced her lips. "Perhaps something less didactic?" He chuckled softly. Point duly noted. The following morning found Edward amidst the organized chaos of Isabelle Moreau's atelier, a vibrant tapestry of fabrics, sketches, and nascent designs. The air crackled with creative fervor, a world apart from the clinical atmosphere of his office. Isabelle, a bohemian whirlwind, greeted him with an embrace redolent with lavender and turpentine. "Edward, darling, I am thrilled you arrived. I've been simply yearning to discuss Milana's gown." He settled onto a velvet stool, resisting the urge to appear overwhelmed by the sheer volume of inspirational elements. "I trust your artistic vision, Isabelle. I merely desire something exceptional, something reflecting her essence." Isabelle's eyes blazed with inspiration. "Exceptional barely scratches the surface. I envision something otherworldly, something whispering of fortitude and refinement, of enigma and intellect, something proclaiming, 'I am present, and I am resplendent. She punctuated the air with a charcoal stick. Think fluid silhouettes, ecologically sound materials, perhaps even meticulously rendered details. And the hue, the hue. Her voice trailed off, lost in reverie. He leaned forward, captivated. What shade were you considering? Moonstone, she breathed, her voice hushed. A pearlescent white, radiating an inner luminescence. It shall capture every gleam and imbue her with a divine radiance. He nodded slowly, picturing Milana in his mind's eye. It sounded utterly fitting. And the veil? He asked, a hint of trepidation in his tone. Isabel paused, thoughtful. The veil. That remains the pivotal question, doesn't it? I have several conceptions. Perhaps a detachable option, affording her the autonomy of choice. Or maybe a design seamlessly integrating the veil as part of the gown, creating a majestic train that could be arranged as desired. We could even employ a diaphanous fabric, allowing a subtle glimpse of her face while retaining an aura of mystery. He considered her proposals. The detachable option seems a prudent solution. It bestows agency over her presentation. Isabel beamed. Precisely. Agency is the ultimate indulgence, darling, and Milana merits nothing short of it. Back at the penthouse, Milana stood before the immense windows, her gaze sweeping over the sprawling cityscape. Edward's words echoed in her mind. The Milana I hold dear, your brilliance, your elegance, your totality. She gently touched the silk of her veil, a familiar comfort, an ever-present shield. It had been a constant companion, integral to her sense of self. But was it also a restraint, as Edward suggested? Did it hinder others from perceiving the person she guarded beneath layers of custom and carefully composed demeanor? She reflected upon her family, upon the expectations they nurtured, the traditions to which they adhered. The veil symbolized their heritage, a declaration of their values. To discard it would be an act of betrayal, a repudiation of their beliefs. But Edward was unique. He did not perceive her as merely a symbol, a representative of her kin or lineage. He regarded her as Milana, an individual, the woman he had come to know and admire. And he wished the world to behold her as well. She closed her eyes, picturing the gala, the blinding lights, the inquisitive gazes. The prospect of revealing her face to a room filled with strangers stirred a blend of apprehension and exhilaration. It was a formidable challenge, a leap into the unknown. Yet it was also an opportunity, a chance to redefine her identity, to liberate herself from the shackles of convention and embrace a new horizon. Opening her eyes, her gaze steeled with resolve. The decision remained hers, and hers alone, and she would make it on her own terms, in her own time. She moved towards a grand piano, a gift from Edward, and lifted the lid. Settling onto the bench, she brushed her fingers across the keys, the ivory cool beneath her touch. As she began to play a haunting melody, a piece she had composed herself, she realized that whatever she ultimately decided, it would reflect her authentic self, the Milana she was finally prepared to embrace. The veil might obscure her face, but it could no longer contain her spirit. The unveiling. The grand ballroom of Hastings Tower hummed with contained electricity. A galaxy of crystal chandeliers rained light upon New York's elite. Captains of industry, philanthropic luminaries, and the press pack, circling like carrion birds. Edward, sharp in a midnight tuxedo, felt the weight of expectation, a familiar cloak settling onto his shoulders. Tonight was a declaration, not just a party. He stood sentinel near the entrance, the air saturated with lilies and taut anticipation. Serafina Du Bois, a columnist whose acidic wit could dismantle empires with a well-placed sentence, scrutinized the room with predatory eyes. Nearby, Eleanor Ainsworth, each syllable laced with disdain, whispered behind a feathered fan, undoubtedly dissecting Milana. Edward's jaw clenched. Tonight, they'd understand. As the string quartet swelled to a crescendo, Milana materialized. She didn't simply walk, she flowed. Her moonstone gown, an understated masterpiece, rippled around her like quicksilver. Isabel had surpassed even his wildest hopes. The fabric caught and scattered light with each fluid motion, creating an ethereal aura. The gown's simple design amplified her lithe form without being overtly revealing. It was an exercise in quiet authority, a direct counterpoint to the blatant displays of wealth surrounding her. But it was the veil, a whisper of moonstone silk echoing the gown's pale hue, that truly captivated. It obscured her features, yet hinted at the enigmatic beauty beneath, a calculated provocation that had both intrigued and enraged the city. Edward extended his arm, and Milana accepted it, her gloved hand cool against his skin. He sensed a tremor in her fingers, a hummingbird's flutter. He squeezed gently, a silent reassurance. As they progressed into the ballroom, a hush descended. Conversations faltered and died. Eyes, a mixture of hunger and inquisitiveness, tracked their movement. He felt Milana subtly tense beside him. "Ready?" he murmured, his voice a low thrum against the rising music. She offered no reply, but her posture shifted, a palpable straightening of her spine. They reached the small stage erected at the room's center. Edward guided her up the steps, each footfall amplifying the silence. Turning to face the assemblage, his features were carefully composed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his amplified voice cutting through the residual chatter. "Tonight we celebrate the Hastings Group's accomplishments. Achievements forged not only through strategy and ingenuity, but through the power of collaboration." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, settling momentarily on Serafina Du Bois, whose expression now teetered on barely veiled excitement. "And no alliance has been more crucial, more transformative than the one I share with my wife, Milana." He turned to her, offering a small, private smile. He caught a glint in her eyes, a complex blend of trepidation and defiance, underscored by trust. Stepping back, he ceded the stage to her. This was her moment to own. Milana stood motionless for a beat, her gaze fixed on an unseen point beyond the crowd. The music ebbed, fading into near silence. Only the faint rustle of her gown punctuated the stillness. Then, slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands. The air thickened. Her long, graceful fingers brushed against the delicate silk of the veil. For a fleeting moment, she hesitated, her eyes closing as if summoning inner strength. Then, in a single, seamless movement, she lifted the veil. The silence shattered like glass. A collective gasp washed through the room. Her unveiled face possessed a beauty that dwarfed every prior conjecture. Sculpted cheekbones, a resolute jawline, and eyes the color of amethyst depths. Her lips, full and generous, hinted at a secret smile. Beautiful, undoubtedly, but it was more profound than mere aesthetics. It was the intelligence blazing in her depths, the inherent fortitude radiating from her stance, the quiet dignity enfolding her like a royal mantle. Serafina Du Bois' carefully constructed facade of cynicism cracked. Eleanor Ainsworth audibly gasped, her hand fluttering to her chest. Milana met their stares, one by one, her expression unwavering. There was no apology offered, no appeal for approval, only a quiet self-assurance that hushed the whispers and stifled the judgment. Edward felt a surge of pride, so potent it threatened to overwhelm him. He had never witnessed her like this, so exposed, so vulnerable, and yet so undeniably powerful. He stepped forward, resting a hand on her arm. "My wife, Milana Volkov Hastings," he declared, his voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "A woman of unparalleled intellect, strength, and grace." He didn't wait for the reaction, knowing it was inevitable. For now, his focus remained solely on her. He guided her down the steps, back into the heart of the ballroom. The crowd parted, a sea of faces etched with shock. Some still whispered, but the tone had changed, mingled with grudging admiration. As they walked, Milana turned to him, her lips curving into a genuine smile. "Thank you," Edward, she said, her voice soft yet resonant. He halted, pivoting to face her directly. For what? For giving me the choice, she replied, her gaze locking with his. For trusting me to make it. He cupped her face in his hand, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her jaw. The choice was always yours, Milana. I simply wanted to be there to support you, regardless of your decision. He leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her brow. And you were magnificent. The music swelled again, breaking the reverie. People began to stir, to mingle. The murmur of conversation resumed, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. It crackled with a new energy, a newfound respect. Serafina Du Bois, recovering her composure with impressive speed, approached them, her eyes gleaming with renewed calculation. Mrs. Hastings, she purred, her voice oozing insincerity. A truly unexpected revelation. I must concede, you've gifted society ample fodder for discussion. Edward interposed himself between Serafina and Milana. Indeed, she has, he responded, his tone cool and unwavering. And I suggest you curate your words with utmost care, Ms. Du Bois. My wife is not a subject for your trivial gossip. Serafina's smile faltered, but only momentarily. Of course, Mr. Hastings, she conceded, her eyes narrowing imperceptibly. My apologies. I merely intended to commend Mrs. Hastings on her courage. Then I suggest you extend your compliments with greater authenticity, Edward countered, his gaze fixed and unwavering. Sensing the underlying steel in his voice, Serafina retreated. Very well, she said, her voice brittle. Enjoy the evening. She spun and stalked away, her pen already scratching furiously in her notepad. Edward watched her depart, his jaw tightening. He turned back to Milana, his expression softening. Are you all right? She nodded, her smile returning. I am perfectly fine, Edward. Thank you for defending me. Always, he said, taking her hand in his. Always. The night was far from its climax, but surrounded by the shimmering spectacle of the gala, Edward perceived a tectonic shift. The rules of the game had been rewritten, and he and Milana, united and unveiled, were prepared to compete. Partners in life and business. A collective intake of breath swept the ballroom, a sudden hush following in its wake. Edward, hands still gently supporting Milana, felt a fierce possessiveness ignite within him. He met the astonished stares with a challenging look. He refused to let their judgment define her or the bond they shared. Raising his champagne flute, the delicate chime sliced through the lingering quiet. To my wife, Milana, he declared, his voice amplified, resonating through the room. A woman of unparalleled intellect, captivating charm, and indomitable spirit. It is my profound honor to stand with her, not simply as her spouse, but as a true ally in every aspect of our lives. A ripple of murmurs spread, a blend of surprise and reluctant respect. He noticed Beatrice Plumtree, his father's long-standing advisor, give a subtle, almost invisible nod of approval. It resonated far more than any thunderous applause. The following days became a whirlwind of intense activity. The Hastings group hummed with conjecture, centered not only on Milana, but also on the company's impending evolution. Empowered by his bold declaration, Edward felt prepared to enact the changes he and Milana had meticulously planned. He convened an unprecedented all-hands meeting. The boardroom, typically a stage for fierce negotiations and power struggles, throbbed with anticipation. Edward stood at the head of the immense mahogany table, Milana seated regally beside him, her very presence a statement of intent. As you are aware, he began, his voice firm yet measured, we stand at a pivotal moment. The world is evolving rapidly, and Hastings Group must adapt with it. We can no longer depend solely on outdated tactics. We require new insights, groundbreaking concepts, and a deep dedication to ethical conduct. He paused, letting his words permeate the room. Therefore, we will be implementing a series of innovative policies, spearheaded by my wife, Milana. Milana, having observed the room with a quiet intensity, took the reins. Our focus will center on adopting sustainable practices, investing in renewable energy solutions, and championing diversity and inclusivity throughout the corporation. We will also establish a mentorship initiative to support burgeoning talent and foster opportunities for growth, regardless of background. Gregory Davies, the head of marketing, squirmed visibly. He was a staunch traditionalist, apprehensive about any deviation from the established norms. With all due respect, Mr. and Mrs. Hastings, while these initiatives are undoubtedly laudable, do we possess the data to substantiate their profitability? Sustainability is commendable, but what about shareholder value? Shareholders are increasingly attuned to more than just the bottom line. Gregory, Edward countered, his tone resolute. They seek to invest in socially responsible companies, organizations that positively impact the world. And, he added, glancing at Milana, I have absolute confidence in my wife's projections. Milana gave a single nod, her gaze unwavering. We have conducted exhaustive market research, Gregory. Consumers are demanding ethically sourced and environmentally friendly products. Companies that disregard this trend will inevitably be left behind. She proceeded to present a compelling series of charts and graphs, highlighting the potential advantages of their proposed strategies. Her presentation was clear, data-backed, and persuasive. Even Gregory appeared swayed. The meeting adjourned with a sense of wary optimism. The road ahead promised challenges, but Edward and Milana stood united in their vision. Putting the new policies into action proved to be a complex undertaking. Resistance arose from various factions, particularly those who perceived the changes as a threat. However, Edward and Milana remained steadfast in their resolve. They labored tirelessly, consulting with department heads, addressing concerns, and fostering collaboration. Milana, in particular, demonstrated a remarkable aptitude for navigating the intricate corporate landscape. Her composed demeanor concealed a keen intellect and an insightful understanding of human nature. She managed to sway even the most skeptical individuals with her well-reasoned arguments and her sincere devotion to their well-being. One afternoon, Edward discovered Beatrice Plumtree awaiting him in his office. Beatrice had always been a permanent fixture in the Hastings household, a silent witness to familial dramas. She occupied a singular position of respect and confidence, possessing more knowledge about the family's past than anyone alive. Edward, she began, her voice a soft murmur, I must admit, your father would have been taken aback. Edward chuckled softly. That's quite an understatement, Beatrice. However, she went on, a faint smile gracing her lips, I believe, in his heart, he would have been proud. You have chosen a remarkable woman, and you are pursuing paths he never dared to contemplate. Milana is the catalyst for all of this, Edward conceded. She has broadened my horizons immeasurably. Beatrice nodded knowingly. Sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is not material wealth, but wisdom. And it appears you have inherited a substantial amount of that from your wife. The Hastings Group underwent a significant metamorphosis. The company's offices were renovated using sustainable resources. Electric vehicle charging stations were installed in the parking area. The cafeteria transitioned to serving locally grown, organic fare. Yet, the transformations extended far beyond mere aesthetics. Edward and Milana cultivated a culture of transparent communication and teamwork. They encouraged employees to voice their ideas and challenge conventional thinking. They implemented flexible work arrangements to promote a healthier work-life equilibrium. The outcomes were nothing short of extraordinary. Employee satisfaction surged, productivity escalated, and, most significantly, profits began to climb. The Hastings Group evolved into an emblem of innovation and inclusivity, attracting elite talent and garnering widespread positive media coverage. The company's stock value soared to unprecedented heights. Edward and Milana were lauded as visionary leaders, transforming a once-staid corporation into a vibrant and progressive enterprise. One evening, after a demanding day at the office, Edward and Milana found themselves alone on the terrace of their penthouse. The city lights shimmered below, a dazzling tapestry of accomplishment. "We achieved it," Edward said, a wave of fulfillment washing over him. Milana smiled radiantly, her eyes sparkling. "We accomplished it together." He reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. I never imagined my life unfolding in this manner." Sometimes, Milana murmured softly, the greatest blessings arrive in unexpected forms. He drew her closer, his gaze filled with deep affection and gratitude. "You are my greatest blessing, Milana." He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "I love you." She nestled into him, her warmth a comforting presence. "And I love you, Edward." As they stood there, enveloped in the gentle glow of the cityscape, Edward knew that their journey was only just commencing. They had confronted adversities, overcome obstacles, and defied expectations. And they had done it in tandem, as partners in both life and business. The future unfolded before them, brimming with boundless possibilities. And Edward felt unwavering confidence that, with Milana by his side, they could conquer any challenge. They were more than just spouses. They were a formidable team, a force to be reckoned with. They had rewritten the rules, challenged the status quo, and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The Hastings Group, once a symbol of tradition and privilege, had transformed into a beacon of progress and inclusivity, a testament to the strength of partnership and the transformative power of love.